The Jim Crow laws were a set of state and local laws that enforced racial segregation and discrimination in the United States, particularly in the southern states, the late 19th century until the mid-20th century. These laws were rooted in the belief in white supremacy and the desire to maintain and enforce racial hierarchy and control. The term Jim Crow comes from a blackface minstrel character created by a white entertainer named Thomas D. Rice in the early 1830s. The character, depicted as a stereotypical black man, was used to mock and degrade African Americans. The Jim Crow laws implemented segregation in various aspects of life, including housing, education, transportation, public facilities, and voting rights. African Americans were subjected to separate and unequal facilities, such as separate schools, drinking fountains, restrooms, and even separate areas in movie theaters and public transportation. These laws effectively enforced racial discrimination and perpetuated a system of oppression and inequality. One of the most infamous elements of the Jim Crow laws was literacy tests and poll taxes, which were used to disenfranchise African American voters. These measures were designed to restrict and prevent black citizens from exercising their right to vote. The tests were intentionally complex and unfair, often requiring individuals to interpret difficult passages or answer obscure questions. Consequently, many eligible African American voters were effectively barred from participating in the democratic process. Segregation also extended to public transportation, with colored and white sections designated on buses and trains. African Americans were expected to give up their seats to white passengers and were not allowed to sit in certain areas designated for whites. This blatant inequality and humiliation further reinforced the notion of white superiority and black inferiority. The Jim Crow laws had devastating social, economic, and psychological effects on African Americans. Being treated as second-class citizens took a toll on their mental well-being, self-esteem, and sense of belonging. Limited access to job opportunities and resources perpetuated cycles of poverty and hindered socio-economic advancement. The laws inhibited the growth and progress of African American communities and reinforced racial divisions and inequities. It was not until the mid-20th century that significant progress was made in dismantling the Jim Crow laws. The Civil Rights Movement, led by prominent figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X, challenged racial segregation and fought for equality, justice. Landmark Supreme Court cases, such as Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, ruled that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 further dismantled legal segregation and protected voting rights for African Americans. Although the Jim Crow laws were abolished, their legacy continues to impact American society. Structural inequalities and systemic racism, deeply rooted in this dark era of American history, persist to this day. Racial disparities in education, criminal justice, income, and healthcare reflect the lasting effects of past discriminatory practices. Recognizing and addressing these injustices is essential for creating a more equitable and inclusive society.